Welcome back to The Legal Edge. I'm your host, Rob Rosasco, and today's episode is all about high-performance digital marketing for law firms. Joining me today are Zack Smith and Holden Berlin, the minds behind Transport Digital Media, a company that helps law firms grow through tailored lead generation campaigns. From paid ads to funnel design, they've built a system that turns digital touchpoints into retained cases. Zack, Holden, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Transport Digital Media has made a name for itself helping law firms get real results and not just simply impressions. Tell us how this all came together. How'd you guys get your start, and why is your approach different?
Well, it's an interesting story. It starts a little over 10 years ago. Zack and I had two different media companies where we worked respectively in content and marketing, and our companies merged together, as in this space a lot of people were doing at the time. And we found ourselves working as kind of left brain, right brain across the integrated marketing and sales and content development capacities. So Zack and I instantly had to roll up our sleeves and figure out how two companies that traditionally would have competed against one another come together and combine all of those assets. So YouTube channels, owned and operated websites, brand and content studio. How do you kind of put everything together? One, to monetize that for Fortune 100 and 500 brands, but also to really set systems and processes in place. And we did that. We worked very well together at that company, spent about 4 or 5 years there together, went our separate ways. And probably about 2 years later, I found myself at a company called McClatchy, who owns a lot of print publications, including the Miami Herald and Sacramento Bee. And I had been brought in to help retool the company, going from print to a digital company with a 300-person agency. And one of the things I found right away is I need a strategist that I know knows marketing, can run a 300-person agency, but more importantly, can help to figure out how do we take all of the assets that we have available to us, maximize that for partners. And that's where I called Zack and said, hey, need you, let's partner together, right? So I brought him back in, and I'll give you the short version of the story is Zack's day 2, the company files for bankruptcy.
Oh.
So I had an honest conversation with Zack, because I know how those situations play out, and said, we probably have a limited window here of time at the company. But when we kind of came together, the idea didn't really change, which was taking the idea of where Madison Avenue meets Main Street, which is our backgrounds. And what led us to that journey was we've done a lot for Fortune 100 and 500 brands. And we wanted to take that knowledge and our relationships and understanding of media channels and apply that to categories such as legal, where nobody else is really doing that. That's really what our approach was coming in, leverage our relationships, leverage a different approach that's not finding platform bias. We weren't one-trick ponies. We weren't TV guys, right? We weren't radio guys. We weren't just digital. Like, we had backgrounds across all of that. Zack has a background. He's done award shows. I've done everything from VSLs and the financial investment research side to live streaming the Olympics and working cross platforms. So for us, as marketers, the sky was the limit. Our founding principle when we started Transport is let's start with an audience first and kind of figure out the channels. We found, Rob, very early on, that wasn't what people were doing in this space. So when we found what marketing was for legal, a lot of it was very channel specific, or it was unknown and vague. We wanted to do that differently. We wanted to be transparent. We wanted to not overpromise, but actually understand the audience and who we're going after, and then really apply that same level of who do we know, what do we know, what channels might this work for, and go that top-down approach. And one of the things that when we started the company, we didn't want to do was lose sight of being involved in the campaigns. There's a layer cake at a lot of agencies or other marketing companies that starts at the top. That layer is the CEO or the head of sales that goes in and has a conversation. The bottom of that cake, as you pass down all the layers, is the people that are actually hands on keyboard, right? And a lot gets lost in the layers of that cake. It ends up what you promise isn't what you delivered. So Zack and I made that a principle that we are going to be involved actively in not only the platforms themselves, but the conversations both with the media channels and our partners, but also the firms and marketers that we work with.
And that's held true throughout the duration of Transport. You guys are still actively involved?
100%.
We are. And the reason we do that is maintaining control over the campaign is the only way you can assure yourself and the client that you can deliver against the promise you made to them. Too many companies in this space either outsource their marketing entirely, right? It'll be a sales function. They'll go in, make the deal, and ultimately are brokering that offering. And we've made it very clear to one another that we want to do things differently, right? We have the relationships that we bring to the business. We have the curiosity that really is the foundation of any campaign we do, is really start by asking the right questions. Who is the target audience? Where are they best reached? And then how do we activate the right creative message in the right channel to ultimately get them to take action? Because the types of campaigns we do, which we'll talk more about, these are mass tort campaigns. These are campaigns where you're reaching a consumer who doesn't know probably that there even is compensation available for their injuries. You know, with a motor vehicle accident campaign, a personal injury campaign, those rely on brand awareness. And the person that's going to win is the person that spends the most media dollars and creates the biggest name for themselves, the biggest splash in a market or across the country. We've seen a lot of firms do that successfully and invest the money that is required to do that. But for consumers in mass tort, our job is to find the most creative way to make someone aware of something they otherwise may not have even known about. That's a unique challenge and one that we thrive on.
Okay. All right. Let's back up for a minute. Something that Holden shared. So, Zach, your second day, the company filed for bankruptcy. What'd that conversation go like when you walked into Holden's office or reached out to invite?
Yeah. So it wasn't in an office. So I was asked on my first day to meet remotely and take a tour of a couple of the company's local markets, which I did. I think it was over a cocktail at midnight when that news came in. Needless to say, I was slightly surprised. I had left a company I was with for over two and a half years and to take a break from what was doing a lot of media consulting to working back at a large publisher. I knew the mission ahead of us. I knew it could be bumpy. I just didn't know that the road was going to have a ditch or a pothole the size of Kentucky in my first 24 hours.
Yeah, no kidding. Driving along the freeway and all of a sudden the freeway just ends.
Yeah. But look, I knew that Holden was a partner that I'd worked with for years before. I took the job because I believed in what the mission was. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't also surprised that it could happen. The fact that it happened that quickly was not something that I was aware would happen, but we wouldn't be where we are today if that didn't happen. The second that news came out, we looked at each other and started to chart the course for where we are now. And that's been invaluable.
And with the benefit of hindsight, everything worked out just fine.
Exactly.
Okay, good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your approach. I know that Transport's known for taking a data-first approach. Talk a little bit about how that looks, what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, Zach and I were talking about this. I do watch too many detective shows, Rob, so pardon my analogy here, but it is very much the same way. If you're going in an investigation, you've got to try to find who that suspect is. And a lot of times we don't have much information to go by. Something might be a new tort that comes out and it's very limited information that we have to go off of. So it's trying to figure out where do we start? And the starts with psychographics, right? But then it goes to demographics. Who is this audience? Who are they going for? Who would be open to this, right, as a new lawsuit, right? They may have never heard about it before. So we also have to think about what are the concerns. And that's kind of where the data comes in to start. It's like, okay, if it's a veteran, what are the channels of media that this person would consume, right? Mm-hmm. Where would they live secondarily, right? It has to be charted in, try to figure out that data. And then also, where would their head be? So if they served in the military and they're a vet, as a tangible example, they might be getting insurance emails. They might be getting stuff from VA. They might be getting stuff, or their kin will be. So it's where do we actually then be able to find targeting that would be available to us to be able to go after those? So that's a tangible example. When Camp Lejeune first started, believe it or not, no one had heard of the lawsuit. So it was a little bit about education. But our first step, and I bring up that data, was like people that have VA loans, people that have insurance, we're going to be able to target on certain channels to be able to know who those people are, right? We're going to be able to target on certain channels. We can get at veterans. That is actual data that we can start with. And then going through and looking at, okay, if these people suffer from a whole host of cancers, chances are they're still either in treatment currently for it or they've been in remission and it's come back. So we started to look at, okay, we've got VA hospitals that we can go after. We can go after cancer centers. and geo-target those, right? And then start to pull that data in to build what a core audience could look like.
Okay.
Right. So it's taking a little bit of the offline, a bit of what's online available on platforms, and then you can start looking at, intent data, right? What are people searching for as they start to be made aware of something? That's kind of how we take that data driven approach. And then it's always like the data changes, right? I think the most interesting thing about mass tort is because the criteria changes, your audience changes, right? So that might be an injury subset. It might be an age qualifier that starts to be put in, or it might be something about product use, right? Where it might be for Roundup, right? We don't necessarily want residential users of Roundup, but we want farmers. We want people that are in the agricultural space that are doing this. Now, targeting landscaping businesses and farmers is much different than targeting 50-year-old residential users who have sprayed Roundup over time to get rid of weeds in their yard. And that data changes. So for us, it's a continual daily grind to figure out how we can use data to maximize our campaigns.
Okay. Yeah, the data leads you ultimately, right? You start with the data, as Holden said. You start there, but that ultimately starts to lead you to media activation and planning. Then you start to have to understand what's the most efficient way of reaching that audience in the right channel that they're going to be consuming. So you try to put yourself in their daily life. You try to make sure you understand what media channels they might be consuming. But in our world, as a marketer, we also have to do that at a price point that makes sense. We can't just go out, spray and pray. We can't spend the dollars, even if we wanted to, on primetime network TV. It's not going to work. It might work in other channels if you had unlimited funding, but we have to really narrow the focus. And so where the data leads us is ultimately to how can we do this in the most cost efficient manner to bring in the most high quality claimant we can. And then once we do that, then we look to scale. But initially, it's really trying to understand what channels will work based on the data that we have. And we've done that effectively. So on Camp Lejeune, for instance, once we understood the data led us down that path of, okay, how do we ultimately reach that veteran audience effectively, right? That comes down to also our relationships, being able to call on people who might have access, in this case, to a very targeted military publishing company.
Right.
Being able to reach them through newsletters and through social ads as well as digital content, right? It's about pairing the right data with the right media channel and then the trusted message. All of those have to work together for you to ultimately build trust with that consumer that they should go down your funnel and ultimately fill out a form.
Okay. And I'm assuming the time in the industry for both of you really helped you build that pool of data that others might have that you may not necessarily.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, Rob, it's interesting because it's a lot of work, right? And if you want the easy route, it's not that. And a lot of our competitors, that's what they do, right? So they focus on one channel because they know it's easy. Finding new forms of data means having new conversations with the data providers that they haven't had before. They don't know what mass torts are because no one's ever approached them.
Right.
So for us, it's understanding that and then seeing how we can tap into that data, how we can most effectively but efficiently do it. So it's not going to cost us an arm and a leg to just acquire that data, but be able to take it in and then use it on platform. And that a lot of times can inform our decisions. Look, we don't always have the answers, and some of our media partners do, right? They actually have a pretty good grasp of their first party data and who their consumers are. Okay. And that's been a big source for us to be able to go to trusted partners who know their audience and know the profile of those individuals to help us to target.
Okay. And I can only imagine AI has been a huge help in that process.
Yeah, I certainly started to become that, right? I think it's a tool that we leverage in everything from pre-campaign, right, analysis of trying to understand data points, trying to understand something really new. Everyone's trying to figure out how many people are injured, what's the type of surgery they've had, and how many times did this product might have failed. And so in those instances, we're using ChatGPT to try to understand the fail rate of a product that ultimately will lead us down a path of understanding then how to develop a creative message and target the right person who might meet the criteria that a law firm demands for someone to file.
AI is very effective, but it's also a point of reaching out. In this case, like Cartiva, it's a toe implant. Who do we know that's a podiatrist who actually has probably done a lot of these, and what are their thoughts on it? So it's taking what you can use AI to generate, but also getting real world experience and understanding. Right. Who are your patients? Who are the people that come in for this? What are your thoughts on this? Did this product work? are people experiencing difficulties with it? And you quickly learn to be able to take these two things, combine them, and then you've got a pretty good indication of who the customer is in this case.
So that's very specific. So, Holden, do you have podiatrists in your network?
Look, if there's a campaign that comes up, and sadly, yes, not sadly, but interesting enough, yes. I had my first two roommates when I moved to New York City were in podiatry school.
No kidding.
I
That's
learned a
actually
lot about podiatry from that. But yeah, it's always like subject matter experts. No different than law firms would work that way. That's how
oh,
we're,
yeah, absolutely.
right? It's, where does it bridge? And can we talk to somebody in that space that help us understand better who's actually dealt with the situation firsthand?
Yeah, because again, I have to imagine that helps with designing a campaign. Everything from the questions you ask is part of the intake process to what a landing page might look like.
100%. And I use that example of talking to a firefighter about AFFF, which is firefighter foam. How many times did you use it in your background? How frequent is it? It's just to understand how wide is it and how do we have to target this. So it's that information that Zach and I always, if we can, not always, but if we can get more of that data, we'll use it.
Yeah. The danger with AI is that it's so new and it's crawling in seconds to get you all the information at your disposal, but you still have to do the hard work of not trusting that data. And you have to go so far as to say, how am I going to use this data to then implement that in my daily business, right? I think that right now is where we're at. Access to information is infinite. And then now knowing what you're going to do with that information is still very much relying on humans. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. It's helping to work more quickly, efficiently, and bringing in a lot of access to information that then you can decide what you're going to do. And I think that's true down to, and we haven't talked a lot about this, AI plays a role also at the call center. In our campaigns, we try to control what we call cradle to grave. We're marketers, but we also want to ultimately help someone throughout the process of signing up with a law firm. That means that lead, once it goes through our landing page, ultimately goes to a call center that works for us. And at that call center, they're working on the firm's intake to ensure that the person meets criteria. We've been approached many times by companies that want to leverage AI to do the entire intake. That would save us a lot of money up front. What that also does, though, is potentially leads to a lot of errors. It also leads to a person signing a retainer agreement with a law firm that has never, ever touched a human. We don't want to do that for our clients. Our clients so far have said that they don't want that product. And so it's not something that we're adopting.
Right. Okay. And that makes sense. My experience in terms of integrating AI into our business is exactly as you've described. It's a support tool, but at the end of the day, the human element is most important right now. Who knows what the future holds, but that's how we use it today. So, all right.
Our jobs are safe, Rob.
Yeah, for at least for the time being. At least for the time being, yes. I have endless conversations with friends of mine, people who own agencies that I've worked with in the past. And every time we talk, it comes up. How's AI going to impact our business? So, and at the end of the conversation, literally every one of us says, I think we're safe for now. So I love a good behind the scenes story. So walk us through a campaign that you've implemented in the past, really worked, you got great results from. What were the components of the campaign? What did you learn in terms of future campaigns and things you could integrate into future campaigns? And what made it a win? How do you qualify it as a win?
Yeah, so I think if we looked at one campaign, Rob, that we would highlight as a success, it was one that started, I remember where I was, right? It was one of those. And I was traveling with my family. Zach and I got on a call with a law firm, and the campaign had never heard of. And we hadn't done that category either, which was a doctor abuse campaign that was out of Chicago. We had not run anything like that before. It was the first time we had heard of this campaign, and it really hadn't been marketed. You hadn't seen anything in the space. And Zach and I were on that call trying to ask questions you would, like, who's this doctor? What do the patients look like? What's the audience look like? How wide is this? And there was not a lot of information to go off of. It really was a couple of patients that they had talked to at that point. Obviously, the law firm knew that there was at least some sort of audience here of people that unfortunately were impacted by this doctor. And it was a campaign that we flew into blind. And I think it was one of those where Zach and I looked at each other and said, okay, how do we best get at this audience? We don't really know who the audience is. We understand that these are women that went to this practice and were abused and had exams that were not the way that they should be and were assaulted, and unfortunately in a lot of these instances, and try to build a profile from that. Obviously not something you can target, Rob, in social media, right? Abuse doesn't have a lookalike. It doesn't have a pattern. The pattern is the doctor. So for us, the first step was understanding how far this went back. And that's where we looked to say, okay, what would the age range be based off of when this doctor started practicing? And where was he practicing? How many hospitals or buildings was he at? Where were those at? And that was where we really started to build a profile of who this doctor was. And the first thing we looked at was like, it's a Hispanic doctor. A lot of that audience was Hispanic. So a lot of the patients that he would see and understanding that were not only Hispanic and Spanish language, but you could tell that there were a lot of referrals. And based off of the area, that gave us the first indication of what we needed to test. It's like, okay, we're going to run media. Let's try it in Spanish language and let's try it in English. And that was our initial strategy. It's let's see how both of these do. The second step was how do we target people who might have been abused by their doctor 15 or 20 years ago?
Yeah.
They were going in for, they might have had a baby, they were going in for general care to this doctor. Where are they now? And our thought was, you can't just go wide because you're going to have very inefficient media if you do that. So let's try to focus on the Chicago DMA and surrounding suburbs where the practice was. That was the first kind of indication. So we started to build the age profile. We had the language test, and then we had our area that we were going to go talk to. So we started to run on social. We started to then say, okay, how does it look? How are we profiling? We were running some other offline tactics, such as print. So we ran some Spanish language print to the market, and we also started to run radio, both in English and Spanish language. What we quickly found out is it would ebb and flow in the initial results between the two. So it was like they both seemingly were doing very well. Once we got an understanding, and some of the platforms like Meta had an understanding of the audience, we started to see a spike in the Spanish language. So for us, that was where we became like, let's focus here. Let's make sure that our agents are well equipped to handle the intake in Spanish. And when we get them over to the firm, we pass that information along. So it's a very seamless version when someone's telling a very difficult story of how they were abused by a doctor. And that was one where it came to us within probably 2 months. We had delivered over our expectations of where they were. And I think, Zach, I don't know the percentage of how many cases for the firm, but it was a pretty high percent.
At the end of the day, I think you asked about the success metrics of the campaign. This is one that we worked on last year. It's already settled. And seeing the ability for these women that we've been able to ultimately find through our marketing efforts and help and see them get compensated what they deserve is very gratifying for us. Mm-hmm. Not every campaign in mass tort gives you that because you're waiting sometimes 5-7 years before their litigation ultimately settles. This didn't have that story end. So to be able to see our efforts bear fruit was rewarding for us. It's unfortunate, obviously, that we even have to market this type of campaign, but what we try to celebrate and stay focused on is how do we reach that person who's a victim? How do we make sure that they feel comfortable going through the process of exploring their options and do so in a way that makes them comfortable? And I think to Holden's point, we knew that we had to do that with Spanish language. We knew that to build trust with this audience, it couldn't be in English. We had to give them the option. So our landing pages, even when you went to a landing page in Spanish, if they wanted to toggle to English, they could.
Right.
If we went to English and they wanted to toggle to Spanish, they could. We didn't want to assume in a bilingual world we live in that someone wanted to only be communicated with in English. So that's why we had those bilingual agents and we had the bilingual landing pages as well. So that was very important for us to ensure that this campaign was effective.
And it's certainly dealing with, there's a rife of challenges, right? We had no background going in other than the doctor and what some of the thought was abuse, but you're also dealing with platforms and media companies and running a really sensitive campaign, right? It's talking about topics that you don't generally see too much across a lot of these channels.
Yep.
There's a lot of sensitivity. So for us, you would get creatives flagged on channel. You would have a lot of those hiccups where things are running optimally. You put new creatives in and they, for no reason other than the algorithms of certain platforms, they get flagged.
Yep.
So it's to have that success and be able to navigate around that it makes us especially proud, especially given that this was settled.
So maybe I'm getting a little too far into the weeds here, but not knowing your business, I can assume that when you're building a campaign, part of the data analysis aspect is determine how many potential members or how many potential litigants there are out there in en masse. Were you able to successfully do that with this campaign?
We had indications from the firm about how many they thought were out there. That doesn't
Okay.
mean that they're all going to be reached, right?
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
so I think from us, there's so many obstacles sometimes that ultimately come into whether all of those people, A, can be found and B, will ultimately file.
Right.
We tried at one point to say, look, have we mined all of the Chicago area and are there more claimants out there that might have moved? Because we're talking about someone who practiced for, I think, 18 years. So a lot of women who might have seen him as a patient probably moved away from that area, may have gone to who knows where. But the reality was the second we started to expand beyond that, it became impossibly inefficient for us
Right.
to run that media.
Right.
So we continued to find claimants up until the very end. In fact, the campaign, we got the notice that the campaign had to be paused by the firm, and we had continued to bring in claimants up until the last minute of that notice being provided. So we're confident there likely are still victims out there, but I think our marketing efforts probably found somewhere in the neighborhood of a third of the overall claimants for this. Yeah.
And how does that, from an outsider's perspective, I would think that's pretty darn good.
I think we also talk about this in general. We're not trying to be a volume shop and claim we found everyone. We're here to say we did the job that we could with the time and the media dollars that we had access to and the ability to market. So I think we believe the best metric of success is the cost per compensable case. That's
Right.
the only metric that matters. In our industry, we see so many competitors offering pricing to law firms for their services that is unfortunately causing a lot of, let's just say, misinformation in the market, right, of what something truly costs. We're going to do what we do best, and we're going to price our services in what we think is fair. There might be more claimants out there, but I think we're proud of the work we did.
Okay, good. And the point that you both made about the sensitivity of a subject like this, at the end of the day, the work that you did ended up helping a lot of people. So, I think that measurement is pretty good.
And we take the opportunity to learn. And some of the things that we look at as success is just that, right? We challenge ourselves. We enjoy that. That's why we started the company. We don't take the easy road ever. And when people come to us, we had a conversation yesterday about a new vertical within legal we haven't done, right? In securities. People come to us because it's hard, right? And a lot of times that's a compliment to us because
It is.
they know they can't find other people who could do that. And they
Right.
come to us and look for us for guidance in a lot of ways. And that's the relationship that we have. And that's how we know it's successful. And that same firm, which we worked on in that campaign, had come back to us and said, hey, what do you guys think about this market? We're thinking about a new campaign. And they come to us to help understand how we might get to this consumer. Right. And I think that's a compliment to the work we did on that campaign.
Yep. Right. Oh, no, I completely agree.
We don't overpromise. We don't guarantee success where we can't, right? The worst thing we'll say is, you know what? We'll try and we'll come back to you if it's not working and let you know it's not working. Because sometimes people will say, no, I'll try. I'm going to do whatever I can to succeed, even if it's impossible or if I'm taking shortcuts. We're not going to do that. We're going to say, hey, look, we don't know how to price this. Oftentimes we get that challenge. It's something so new. So we have to come up with a model that's fair to both parties and approach it that way. To your question, we don't know how big the universe of claimants is. We have no idea. Let's get a few under our belt and then we can adjust accordingly.
Right. Okay. Throughout the conversation, you've mentioned several media channels. What would you say is the most underrated media channel?
Ooh,
I think we're both going to have a similar answer here. Do you want us to, on three, say the same? Let's do this. At the count of three, I'm going to say what I think, and Holden's going to say what he thinks.
Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Print.
All right. Expound on that a little bit. I mean, isn't print media dead?
So, Rob, I will say before I even touched the world of print, I would have said the same thing you said. Who reads print? It's dead, right? I was brought in an organization to basically move away from print and into digital. And that was the mission that I was brought in. And I talked to Zach about that. What I found and learned was two things. One, print is really hard to buy because a lot of different companies, there's been a lot of change in buying of selling of some of these properties, and it's really hard to get to people to buy it, right? In scale. Two is the people that do read print, it's an older demographic,
Yep.
are really engaged in print. And those are the two things that we saw opportunity with. And knowing that we were in the space for a few years, it leveraged those relationships to be able to go and say, look, how can we do this differently? Right? How can we use your audience? How can we put print in place? It doesn't always work, but for an older demographic, maybe a Roundup or a Camp Lejeune or talcum powder, it's going to work really well. These people haven't been exposed on the other channels that you might think. They're not always on, they're not on Meta. They may not be watching TV or they might not be listening to the radio. So what we found were a lot of unique claimants that were coming through these channels. The limited capacity of print, I'll say this, is its scale, right? You're not getting new print readers every day. You don't get that new audience. So you kind of have to mine through that and reach new audiences within print. But that's why we both answered the same. And we don't see a lot of competitors or any competitors in the space.
Yeah, we're not saying it for scale purposes. We're saying it for the quality of the claimants that we see come out of these. We hear the phone calls. We understand what these people have said to us, and we hear their stories. And when you hear their stories, you start to understand, okay, that's not what you get from other channels. It's just not. It sounds different. We're also able to target some really niche publications that otherwise aren't available to you, right? So for Roundup, we were able to target agricultural publishing, newspapers delivered to farmers in the Midwest. That is a really interesting channel that our competitors probably don't know exists and they don't have access to. So we've been able to take advantage of those opportunities to buy media and reach what we believe is an underserved audience.
Okay. Interesting. Very good. All right. So moving on, I've been on both sides, obviously owning my own agency, but working for agencies. I've also been on the client side. One thing I've learned is any marketing relationship, any marketing partnership that's successful needs to be collaborative. Let's talk a little bit about what makes a great client, what each of you believes to be the qualities of a great client, and how you think law firms can and should work more effectively with their vendors.
Yeah, I'll take that one first. Look, I think a good client, a good law firm is one that provides us with as much information up front to make us smarter. We can't begin a campaign, as we started from the beginning of this conversation talking about data. The data starts with the law firm. I don't pretend to be an attorney, but you better believe that I'm going to ask as many questions as possible on our first call with a client about a campaign. So the curiosity keeps me going. I expect them to be open to sharing information with me so that I can do my job better. Because if I'm not able to give an access to the details about a potential campaign, I can't build the right data set. I can't start to target the right audience for a campaign. So it starts there.
Right.
From there, I think it's a firm admitting their shortcomings. It's a firm admitting no one's good at everything. So some firms are really good at litigating, but they're really not the best when it comes to processing claims. Because in mass tort, you're talking about a volume of claims that are coming in. So I expect a partner to acknowledge, what does it look like after we send over a potential claimant? What happens there? And are you set up to effectively manage that? The ones that have done well have worked with us in a partnership and realizing the marketer can do what the marketer can do. I can't guarantee the quality of a claim. I can market in the most creative, compliant way possible. And when I do that, I'm going to do my best to optimize the front end, which is bring them through my landing page flow, bring them through the call center, and getting you someone on your desk that you can then call and follow up with. The law firm responsibility is to follow up with that claimant in a timely manner, to have the resources to do so. And if they don't, to work in partnership with us so that we can help them do that most effectively. So I hope that answers your question. But I think for me, it's building trust with the law firm partner and acknowledging where each of our jobs begins and ends. And that's a true partnership.
I'll add to that because I think it's important, Rob, is like the understanding of marketing, right? I think that varies from firm to firm. And what the lack of understanding, which is it takes time to scale up a campaign, right? So a lot of times if we launch a campaign, day one is like, where are all my claimants? We put this media in market. And also by placing media buys, Rob, as you well know, you can't just cancel those on a whim. So a lot of times it's part of that understanding the firms that work well is where they're transparent with us, right? Here's our appetite for cases. Here's what our thoughts are. Here's what our goals are, right? And to understand that helps us to go in and know what channels to pull. If we put a TV buy in place and then a week later they're like, great, we feel like we have enough claimants at the time. Now we've got to figure out what to do with all that media that's running in market. So it's that communication, but also understanding, and Zach mentioned this earlier about pricing, right? And there's the speed, there's quality and price. You can't have all three. We have to do that trade-off also. We're not going to jeopardize quality. We just won't. So the speed and the price are really what we can formulate. Platforms and channels are variant, right? It's where marketing, especially with law firms where they do it themselves, oftentimes they have a better understanding of they've probably had bad campaigns. They've probably lost money on this stuff, right? It's not always a surefire thing that it's going to work. We've had that where certain campaigns you work on, they're very broad. Everybody fills out a form. Nobody's going to qualify for it, right? And that's a challenge. Right? You can't really optimize those. So in those instances where the firm helps us and understands like why we're not the highest price, but we're not going to be low priced either, because we try to be fair, as Zach said, is to find that balance between. And firms that understand that are the ones that we've continued to work with. Right? It's a partnership.
Zach segued into my next question, but I'll ask you. So what is the one thing you wished law firms better understood about marketing or lead generation?
I'd say that all marketing firms are not considered equal, right? When they evaluate partners and who they're going to work with, they work with a lot of, I'll put in air quotes here, media companies, right? And Zach and I always harken back to, we're executives at media companies for 20 plus years, both of us, right? That's what media is. That's what we consider media. There's a lot of people out there that are in affiliate networks and they're just buying and trading commodities no different than any other industry. That's the difference. So when we get lumped in this bucket with some of these people, that's where it becomes a challenge, because you're not being evaluated as what your strategy is, how you approach it, what you guys are going to do, how compliant you are, right? How trustworthy you are, how transparent you are, and how we are the ones, as we said, involved in these campaigns. It's being evaluated based off of volume and price.
Right.
And what we find is that leads to the problems that a lot of these firms have experienced the last few years, which is where fraud comes into play and they're being taken advantage of. And we get lumped in that bucket because we're a marketing company in the space.
Yep.
And that's the challenge, I think, for us. We wish they understood to not go down that path.
No, understood. It's sort of the nature of the beast. I mean, you're bound to get lumped into the bucket, but being able to differentiate yourself.
For sure.
Zach, how about you? What's one thing you wish law firms knew or understood about marketing and lead generation?
Yeah, look, I think Holden covered much of what I would say on that question. I think that law firms try to do it internally sometimes and will claim that they have the resources to do that. But oftentimes they might be doing one thing, right? As we talked about, maybe they're a one-trick pony. They're buying social. So they say, don't worry, I'm covered. I got it all. I got everything I need. Or they'll represent their ability to deliver a lead at a price that we know, because we've run it, is not realistic. So I wish that marketers would sometimes get the chance to tell law firms, look, we can help you. There's things you're not doing that we have access to. And sometimes it's about finding the gaps in that relationship between their skill set and what we can deliver for them. Because not everyone is equal. A lot of law firms exclusively work with third parties like us. Others might have an internal marketing team. I think we can be helpful to other law firms that might have some internal resource as well and complement those efforts. And I wish that law firms understood that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Zach, back to something you said several minutes ago, talking about one of the things you'd like to see in law firms, and one of the things that can be beneficial to the relationship and the overall process is attorneys or the law firm as a whole recognizing their shortcomings, what they're good at, what they're not good at. How often do you see that?
The relationships we have that seem to work well, we have a dialogue and we can be honest with them, and they're open to admitting where they see shortcomings and at least give us the chance to help them solve that problem.
Right.
It's the ones that don't admit and say, no, I got this covered, or I'm blaming you. And then we come to find that they didn't have the resources they thought they had or they claimed to have.
Right.
That's where the problems exist. Increasingly, I think the firms that recognize that we're not here to do anything but help the process.
Right.
We're not here to game the system. If someone's already signed and you can't get in touch with them, we're genuinely just trying to get them back in touch with you, if that's something we can do. And if you don't have the resources to do that, we believe that we have the ability to do that, in some ways better resource than they do. We've had instances where a law firm, upon signing up a claimant, said that they were only dialing that person a few times and we're dialing from an 800 number. Like, that's not going to work. We know that how hard it is to reach claimants. We're trying to reach people who are already very vulnerable, already dealing with a lot, and we're trying to reach them in their daily lives. You're not going to be able to call them a few times and expect them to pick up. There's also a lot of confusion, I think, amongst consumers that mass torts or class actions, just they answer a few questions, they get a check. That's not how it works. But there is still, unfortunately, claimants out there who don't think that they're going to have to do a lot of work. And so you have to work to reach them.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the word funnel, taking a potential group of claimants and eventually filtering through that funnel down to actual clients. Where do you see a law firm's funnel? In what step? Is it intake? Is it process? Where's disconnect quite often with a law firm's in funnel?
Yeah, I think the consumer is educated, right? So they understand what the lawsuit is about, and they're just kind of looking at options, or they haven't heard back from people they've reached out to. But in other cases, we're the educator, right? So we're making them aware, we're taking them through an intake and kind of setting the standard of what this process is.
Mm-hmm.
What fails in the funnel is when the firm reaches out to these folks and starts to talk to this person. And this person is expecting now that they've got a legal representative. And sometimes the firm grills these people, right? We see that a lot where people are like, I don't want to be represented by that law firm because it's very off-putting, right? So the funnel breaks down in the communication chain once that happens, right? It's the mistrust probably that's stemming more from the marketers, where they're coming in and not thinking about how a consumer would feel. If you think you have an attorney and the first conversation you have with that attorney is that they don't trust you, right? And they're going to attack your story, right? That's kind of the part where that is the introduction, because our job is to provide that connective tissue to the firm. So I'd say that's number one. And number two is really what Zach mentioned, is they don't hear from their attorney, right? And put yourself in a consumer's shoes. You've been impacted by major health issues or abuse. If your attorney isn't reaching out, you think you don't have an attorney anymore. So then you explore other options and you get very disenfranchised by that process. So that's where I think in the funnel, in that journey, it breaks down. Those two areas are the biggest challenges for us.
Right. I also think, in terms of the funnel, I believe your audience here is a lot of law firms. And I would say that the funnel sometimes can also break down during intake. And we hear consumers all the time being asked to reflect on something that an attorney wrote an intake for. And you have to put yourself in the consumer's shoes, right? So they might have taken an injectable drug years ago, medication, and now they're 20 years later trying to qualify for something based on that. And you're asking for them to recall very specific information that they may not have access to immediately. Maybe they have memory loss because of the injury. There's a lot of things that can happen. So I guess my advice to people who are designing the funnel is allow a consumer to at least come over to you who might be a qualified claimant so that you have the chance to speak to them. Because a lot of time the intake itself is so stringent that unfortunately people don't make it through the intake because they're not even able to answer the questions to the expectation of the law firm at that stage. We're not expecting to get compensated on claimants that don't meet your criteria, but also you don't want to be creating an obstacle in the intake process that's going to make it that hard for someone to actually get on the desk of the attorney. Because that's our job, is to market to a potential consumer who can ultimately get the help they need by going through the intake. And I think sometimes my advice to law firms, like, you're losing opportunity to get at bats. You're losing opportunity to see potential claimants on your desk.
Right. I know it's safe to assume, but that's also with the understanding that the law firm obviously is trying to make those intake questions stringent because they don't want to waste their time. But
Of
you need to
course.
find that, yeah, that happy medium.
That's right. It's a happy medium.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's look into the future. Let's fast forward. Things change all the time, technology, mindset, and it happens quickly. So let's talk a little bit about what's on the horizon and what law firms need to be looking out for or paying attention to in order to stay ahead as far as marketing and lead generation is concerned into 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, we touched a little bit about AI, and I
Yeah.
think earlier, and I think that's again understanding that you do need the human process in vetting, and Zach talked about that, but I think that's something that comes up a lot, and I
Mhm.
know firms have discussed that. So, how does everybody free up their own resources, right? And that may be a marketer or an intake center, but also could be a law firm trying to use AI to streamline the process. It's
Mhm.
maintaining to be careful in an ever-changing world to not lose sight of the human element, right? And a lot of this is very difficult stories, very intricate stories that AI won't necessarily be able to vet through. That's going to be a big changer. And look, the media landscape continues to shift, right? Cable's not dead, right? It's media is more fragmented. Streaming platforms have come alive. And I think there's other ways that we're going to continue to market and to be open to that and be open to a different model. We've, in the last probably 3 months, have spent more time in how do we bring more influencer type campaigns into a space where that doesn't really exist, right? Traditionally, it's the same model, the same playbook that everybody's used. But what if it isn't, right? What are the things that continually have more influence, have had over the last 10 years, more influence than anything? And that's, offline and online influencers, right? Understanding how do you use people to champion a cause. And that's stuff that Zach and I are looking at both from a podcast standpoint, right? Where you have a big in tune audience, how to use more of an authentic voice to be able to do that. It can't just be marketers doing that. It needs to be authentic. And I think what's going to be successful is where you do see certain law firms getting involved in some of these channels to find new claimants and to represent their brand. Everybody has the same playbook, right? And it's paid search, a lot of it very expensive, corner the market, but that isn't always where people are going that have intent, right? And I think that's finding those areas, being able to, once they find something that works, they'll own that channel and not give it up, right? And I think that's true with billboards, it's true with TV, it's true with search. I think there's going to be other areas that will pop up in new platforms where they have the ability to do that and work with marketers who can do that as well for them.
Okay. Zach, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to answer that. We answered what channel we think is the most interesting and unexpected in performing today, which is print, but that won't be the case tomorrow. And as consumers continue to age out and we see a digital native audience now start to qualify for some of these lawsuits, the channels we leverage to reach them is going to change. And so what works today will not work tomorrow. We will just continue to remain curious around reaching people where they are. And I think that allows us to experiment on channels where people maybe aren't spending as much time. We're investing more in Newsbreak, which is a local digital news product that people spend a lot of time on. That's an underutilized channel that I would say a couple of years ago we wouldn't have spent $1 on. So I wouldn't say that's a channel we're spending as much as we are on Meta, but we're still spending there, and it's one that we are increasingly looking at as a way to potentially reach claimants. So on the media side of our business, I'm just excited about what the future holds in trying to, again, experiment with new channels and new ways to reach consumers through marketing. Mm-hmm. On the law firm side of things, the future is going to be very interesting. I think we've seen this wave of investment from outside funders as well as law firms who are investing in global settlements and looking for that to be sort of a means to an end. We're going to see probably a move towards more individual litigation. The firms that know how to litigate individual cases will be the ones that ultimately are able to reap the benefits of that, because global settlements are becoming increasingly more challenging. And as more and more companies look to adopt attempts at claiming bankruptcy, that will continue. And for us, again, I just hope that we look at continually grow vertically. Every law, there's so many types of law that we haven't even attempted to market. And I think, as Holden mentioned, yesterday I had a conversation around a securities litigation, which again is very interesting, not something we've done before. So I think law firms will continue to have the need for our services in the future.
Okay. And that's now the second time that the securities litigation has come up. I'm curious, very broadly, how far down the path are you with investigating that kind of campaign?
That's as soon as we get off this call, this podcast, Rob, that is today's mission, right?
Gotcha.
And that's the needle in the haystack, right? Because they don't
Okay.
want hundreds of them; they want one or
No.
two.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good challenge and something that gets us going and to figure out how we can do it.
Good. I look forward to hearing later on down the road how it's going or how it went. All right. So, considering our line of work, what it is we do for law firms, talk a little bit about, or if you would both share your thoughts on any advice you would give attorneys or a law firm that is kind of stuck in that referral only mindset. I can't tell you how many times I hear from attorneys. We get all of our cases, all of our clients do referrals. What's one bit of advice you would give a firm that says that's how we get our client?
I would say your referrals are only as good as the means by which your co-counsel is sending you clients. So if you're getting your cases by referral, you have to ask the question, are those being generated organically? What marketer is that co-counsel working with? Hopefully they're doing things the right way, because if they're not, you're going to be investing a lot of your time in cases that won't necessarily bear fruit. So I think always ask yourself that question. The other thing is, if you're only doing things on referral, you're going to be limiting your upside. Now, obviously, there's resource constraints at firms from an investment standpoint and from an internal ability to process claims. But if all you're doing is waiting for cases to come to you and with no outbound marketing, there's a lot of opportunity left on the table. And from a very minimal investment, you can see the return on that quite easily.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. So, one, if you had to generate leads tomorrow with zero budget, how would you do it?
Organic content. Leverage what we have. Use that
Okay.
audience, test it, then you can build.
Okay. What's one marketing habit that you see law firms, holding on to, despite all the evidence you present that that particular marketing method doesn't work?
Endorsement, like that would be my one. Having your name at a stadium, doing things for the ego, they will continue to do because they has their face and their name on it. But from a marketing standpoint, that's not necessarily always effective.
Yeah. Okay. Looking back, what's the riskiest investment that you ever made in terms of building your business?
I think the riskiest is taking a big swing before the yield. And I say that is we've had moments where we have put a lot of media in market, not necessarily looking at what could negatively happen. So if in this space a law changes, let's take the amendment that was proposed just recently to the bill, right? Big beautiful bill that now for litigation financing has disrupted the industry. Things can pause at a moment's notice. Do not take the risk in your business to put out a lot of money when in a drop of a hat things could go sideways.
Right.
Okay. What's the first thing you'd change if you stepped into a legacy law firm that was stuck in the past?
I would bring on enough resources on the intake side to ensure that you have the right paralegals and the right team in place to optimize the marketing that's being done on your behalf.
Finally, what's one principle, and I'll ask this actually of both of you, but what's one principle that you believe about legal marketing that other people still push back on?
All claimants are created equal. We firmly disagree with that. And I think that's when people talk about quality and refer to things like third-party technology, verify what they're doing. I don't think it starts at a core level who that consumer is and how you got to them and how you message to them and what their expectation is of the attorney once they sign up.
I think that creative matters, that the channel you use to reach people, but also the creative messaging that you reach does make a difference. And we know that because we A and B test creatives all day. And so law firms that tell you, no, you have to do this, you have to do that, and they're not open to ideas for how you can creatively message a bit differently, I think are closing themselves off. Creative does matter. The message matters. and each person is going to interpret something very differently before they click.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. All right. Very good. Zack, Holden, you've given our listeners a lot to think about, a lot of great information. For anyone that wants to take the leap into smarter marketing and chat with you about lead generation, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you at Transport Digital Media?
You can go to our site, transportdigitalmedia.com, or you can reach out at Holden or Zack at transportdigitalmedia.com. And bring us your problem. We talked about the challenge. We talked about, all the things in this episode. We want to know that. We want to be a resource. We like to talk through strategy and help you potentially chart your course. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Good deal. All right. Thank you. Zack, Holden, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and think the information you shared is going to help someone. It was extremely valuable. And obviously, both between the time that you've been in the industry and your knowledge and your depth and breadth of understanding of the marketplace, again, could be extremely valuable for any law firm looking to generate leads. So thanks a lot for tuning in. If today's episode helped you sort of rethink your lead generation strategy, subscribe to The Legal Edge. We'll see you on the next episode.